Melt. And just like that, ladies and gentlemen, we did it again. We are live. Welcome to Creative on Purpose Live. And I'm going to pull up my script and we're going to start again. Welcome to Creative on Purpose Live, conversations about making a living by making a difference. I'm your host, Scott Perry, author of Onward and head coach of Akimbo Workshops and chief difference maker at creativeonpurpose.com. If you're ready to make a living by making a difference, grab some insight and inspiration at creativeonpurpose.com. Let's meet today's guest. Justine Clement, welcome to the broadcast. Please tell our viewers who you are, what you're up to these days, and where can they go to learn more about you and the difference you're making.
Thank you, Scott. So, Justine Clement, and it's lovely to be here. I'm currently in London, so excuse any background noise. They're putting up a lot of Christmas lights this evening, so I apologise for that. And at the moment, what I'm up to is I've been running a B Corp business for the last 7 years, creating experiences for brands like Unilever and PepsiCo, creating experiences that they use as part of their advertising and marketing campaigns. And in the past few years, quietly in the background, been transitioning to something altogether new, which is about helping people to reconnect to themselves and reconnect to nature. So one part of that is through the breath. So I run a breath coaching business called Wonder Breath. And then I take people on what's called Shinrin Yoku walks. I'm a Shinrin Yoku guide, which is also known as forest bathing. So you can find me there at forestbathingmadeinbritain.com.
Fantastic. Well, I'm really interested to explore both of these things, and really interesting about your backstory, about what you've been doing, what you've quietly been building on the side. I want to start there just because a lot of the folks that tune into this broadcast, a lot of the folks that are in the Creative on Purpose community and the Difference Maker community, have done just what are doing just what you've done. They are
Yeah.
building some sort of passion project or side hustle. So give us a little more context around that backstory. How long have you been building these side hustles, and how close are you to making them a full-time vocation?
So I ran the previous company that I worked for. I ran that up until about 7 years ago, and then it was sold. So I think it's probably about 7 or 8 years. But really, my curiosity in this new space, which is what what we call what were the side hustles, are all about well-being. And about 7 years ago, I decided that I wanted to set up a platform, which is still running. It's called The Life Adventure. And it was really about introducing people to modalities in the well-being space. It took me a while to work out what it was, but it was mental health and emotional well-being. But 7 years ago, that was still really quite unknown. So I was facilitating, bringing people in, experts that I'd found on my journey of curiosity, and one that was helping me live a better life, and bringing those people in to deliver workshops and talks. And we work with government departments in the UK and organisations to help them with their wellbeing strategy, as well as talks, workshops, masterclasses on things like resilience and burnout. And I think during the process of that, I started wondering, am I always going to be the facilitator, bringing the experts in, or would I like to be one of the experts? And so the journey has been 20 years, I think, of that, and then shortened to 7 years of starting the Life Adventure. And then the last few years in realizing that I think refinding some of my roots, really, certainly in terms of the nature connection. And the breathwork is something that I originally started about 20 years ago when I took up Ashtanga yoga. And then I read an article in the Times about this amazing thing called breathwork about 15 years ago. So it's been a swirl of all these things going on in the background, really. So it's difficult to pinpoint one particular moment, but probably started 20 years ago.
Yeah, so one of the themes that has really emerged recently in the show is how, you know, I'm guessing that while you were in the midst of your journey, it looked like a lot of disconnected pieces kind of cobbled together, and you kind of end up in something that feels like a brand new thing, or maybe disconnected. But it always feels like, rather than this series of pivots, or you know breaking one way of being and creating another way, there's seems to always be a through line, a theme, and sort of a journey of becoming, at least when you're at where you are and looking back. Would you say that that's a fair way to way look at your current place?
Yeah, I'm really fascinated by that. There's a diagram, isn't there? The sort of the startup diagram of, you think it's going to be A to B, and it's actually all over the place. And uh, that's so relevant. And you can't see it when you're in it. You really can't see the clarity. And I've had a lot of moments thinking, what am I doing? And I am a person. I do like to be doing lots of things. You know, I'm a doer rather than a beer. I'm quite an action person, and I'm an Aries. Aries quite like to be juggling lots of things at once. They're not very good at routine or sticking to one thing. There's a famous author, Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love, but she also wrote another book. Is it called
Big
Big
Magic.
Dream? Yeah, Big Magic, that's it. So you know it. And where she talks about, actually, I don't know if she talks about it in the book or actually in a talk with Oprah Winfrey, but there are two types of people as she sees them in life, and there are the jackhammers and there are the hummingbirds. And I think I always wanted to be a jackhammer, which was, you know what you want to be when you're born, and that's it. You decide you want to be a doctor. And I know life is never that simple, but there are people that exist. There are jackhammers, and they know where they're going and they know what they want to do. Whereas there's people like me, and when I listened to it, I was like, oh my God, I'm a hummingbird. That sounds much more attractive. And actually, hummingbird, you know, she makes it sound absolutely beautiful. When you're in it, it's it's not quite so beautiful, but you go from field to field picking up nectar. And I love that. And I co-wrote, authored a book during lockdown with 14 other women, and I talk about it. My chapter is about living a curious life and just saying yes. And I kind of finish with the talk of the jackhammer and the hummingbird, and it's amazing how many people have said, subsequently on reading that chapter, it feels so lovely to know that being a hummingbird is not quite so messy after all. But yes, I don't think you can put the pieces together at all. I mean, there are moments of clarity. I really feel that, actually. I've had a week where everything is easy and flows, and everything I try and do goes well. And then, of course, you get other times, and sometimes it can be a day, sometimes it can be a week, sometimes it can be years, where you'll feel you're a little bit in the dark and working out which way you're going. But yeah, I do feel personally that I'm kind of emerging a bit from the light, and that's, yeah, I would say that's probably 7 years in the making.
In describing my journey in one of my handbooks, I came across a wonderful old English slang word called "coodywumple," which is to be heading purposefully towards a vague or unknown destination. And
Oh yeah, lovely.
that's the way I think that many of us, I think one of the things that's really interesting, and when we talk about things like passion projects, and we talk about purposefulness a lot, obviously,
Yeah,
purpose, is that these are things that we talk about all the time, and we, at least here in the States, we have this myth that your purpose and passion is out there, go find it and then do something with it, or your purpose and passion is in here, excavate it and then do something with it.
yeah,
But when people are like, there's scientific polls that say, when people are asked what's your purpose or passion, 80% of people can't identify either. And so,
really, that's interesting. Yeah,
maybe it's actually purpose and passion come from doing whatever is right in front of you with purpose and passion, and being that hummingbird that can go
yeah,
from area field to field, um,
yeah.
and clarity
I think
comes.
it's less stressful to think like that, isn't it? Because otherwise, so many people would feel totally despondent, I think,
Oh, I think
otherwise.
you're absolutely right. It's an invitation to shame and suffering. If 80% of people don't know what their purpose or passion is, and you're saying, "Well,
Yeah,
what's your purpose or passion?" That's just an
yeah,
invitation to shame. Um,
yeah, I agree.
I I'm really curious. So I know I can't remember the name of the documentary, but somewhere on Netflix, I watched a documentary with my wife about forest bathing. Maybe more than one documentary
Okay,
about
yeah,
this. And so
yeah.
I'm just fascinated by this. So please unpack that a little bit more and tell us a little bit more about forest bathing.
So the forest bathing is a translation from the word Shinrin-yoku, which was coined in Japan in the 80s. So Japan was a very rural country. I think I'm not going to quote the percentage, but a huge amount of Japan is forested. And then quite quickly they moved from being rural people to a huge amount of the population moving to cities, predominantly Tokyo. And in the 80s, there was a real high level of suicide and really poor mental health. So the Japanese government decided to look into this, and one of their departments of Ministry, I think, of Agriculture, um, they're still developing this research today, but they, over a period of sort of intense research in the 80s and 90s, undertaken by a couple of leading professors there, Dr. Ching Li and Miyazaki, took different groups of Japanese businessmen from the cities, from Tokyo and into the forested areas, and undertook a series of scientific experiments, really measuring their blood pressure and their saliva, their sleep patterns, cortisol levels, stress levels, and worked out what happened to them if they spent certain amounts of periods of time within specifically forested environments. And what they discovered was that the forest, a predominant, a big bit of the research is that they discovered that trees give off something called phytoncides, which are chemicals a bit like the pheromones that we give off. And they ward off attack from insects and other things that may attack the trees. And they discovered that when human beings breathe in these phytoncides, they have a really calming effect on our nervous system. They also help to regulate blood pressure. So if your blood pressure is low, it brings it up. If it's high, it brings it down. And really de-stresses the human body. So there's an enormous amount of scientific backing in Japan. I think there's a fair bit going on in California in the American sort of forest bathing societies over there. And then in Britain, actually in the county that I'm in Surrey, there's an organisation that's working with one of the universities, I think of Essex, in Britain, to look at the specifically the types of trees that we have here. But it's known that all trees give off these chemicals. So that's a part of it, but the other part of it is really us relearning the things that we've forgotten. And that is, one of the beautiful things that really did it for me was learning that, we've lived as a species 10 million years in a natural and predominantly forested environment, and we've lived 10,000 outside. And that's equivalent to a football pitch and a one penny piece. So the one penny piece is the amount of time we've lived outside of a woodland and natural environment. So we've also forgotten that we are nature. We've separated ourselves from it. So all my work is really looking at how we can reconnect ourselves. So the breath is reconnecting to yourself. The forest bathing is reconnecting to nature. But a lot of that also happens in groups, and we do a lot of sharing. So it's an experience really, which can be done generally about 2.5 and 3 hours is ideal. And it's a series of sensory, we call them invitations, but they're exercises in effect, but it's invitations in that you don't have to do anything that you don't want to. And we're re-engaging our senses because we've become a very visual species, and it's about coming out of the visual and re-engaging our sense of taste, of touch, of hearing, and of smell. It's very gentle. It's a bit like the breath. None of this is rocket science, but I think we've overcomplicated our lives so much that Yeah, we need to relearn and go back to basics. So in Japan, you actually get prescribed to go on forest bathing or Shinrin-yoku experience. So if you're experiencing something to do with stress, sleep, anxiety, blood pressure, then they'll send you to one of 60, I think about 62 centers they have in Japan, and they'll measure everything as I've mentioned, your blood pressure, saliva, and then you'll have particular routes that you'll do in the forest that are accompanied by a guide. So we don't have those here in Britain, but we're looking into those. But they can be done, forest bathing can be done in any forest. I mean, we find it here particularly lovely doing it in ancient woodland, which is woodland over 400 years old, but it can also be done in urban areas. So there's plenty of information out there about going to a park and being able to do it there. So there's lots of options, and you can easily do it on your own, going with a guide. It's like anything. It's like going to the gym. You can go to the gym, but actually if you take a personal trainer, then you tend to work a bit harder. So obviously we're not working harder, but it just helps you, I think, it's quite difficult for us as modern human beings to slow down and reconnect with ourselves and our senses. So a guide gives you the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, well, I love that, and I appreciate that reminder, especially. Here in the States, we um, like to celebrate, the self-made person and DIY, do-it-yourself culture. Um, and as a recovering self-made person and DIY addict, I can say that progress is, for at least in my experience, progress only really began to be made in my adventures in freelancing and entrepreneurship by getting great coaching,
Yes.
looking for trusted guides and mentors to help me avoid the mistakes that most DIYers make. So I think that's a really important point, and you've woven in a little bit of your breath work, and I'm just curious about that a little bit. Is that is breath work, and I apologize if this is just an ignorant question, but is it tied to kind of somatic techniques, or is it a different thing entirely?
Yeah, I mean, that's spot on in terms of what the type of breath work that I'm working with is called conscious connected breath, which is an umbrella term. So I don't know if you're familiar with yoga, but hatha is a type of umbrella term for lots of different types of yoga that sit under that. So somatics is a type of breath work it actually comes under the same umbrella term, which is conscious connected breath. There are loads of different types of breathwork. The one that's very popular, certainly in the UK and Europe at the moment, is led by a Dutch guy called Wim Hof. And it's a type of pranayama breath, which, excuse the noise in the background, there's about 400 different types of pranayama breath alone. Um, so I like to liken it a bit, if you were to take a line, you've got pranayama breath at one side, which is about breath control, and that's quite popular at the moment. So then there's you maybe breathe in for 5, hold for 5, breathe out. It's a very controlled type of breathing. And then you've got conscious connected breath work, which is down the other end of the scale, which is about breath release. So the type of breath work I do, there are no pauses between the inhale and the exhale, and it's connected, and that's the important part of it. So that's really it's still a little bit unknown as to exactly how it works, but it really started in the 60s on the West Coast in California when the whole LSD movement was happening and psychedelics. Then those were banned, and people started looking at other ways to connect with with what else is out there, however you want to call it, the non-human world, the whatever it might be. And breathwork was kind of born, and somatics, rebirthing, holotropic breathing, those types of breathwork were born. So, I mean, the science is still relatively a bit unlike Shinrin-yoku, is not really been developed, but since the 60s doing it, there's enough knowledge, and of course breathwork is incredibly old anyway. If you go back to the pranayama types of breath, then we're talking thousands of years old. But they're really ways to help you to have a deeper connection with yourself. And the type of breath work that I do is really that. It's, we call it a self-healing modality. So I may be the facilitator and I may guide you through your breath journey, but actually you're having an experience with your body, and your body is taking over. The teacher that I learned with talks about it as you're in a car, you're in a vehicle, you're in the back seat and you've got the map, but your body is in the front seat, got the keys to the car, and knows exactly where you're going, is going to take you on that journey. So and it's a beautiful analogy, really. So it's a self-healing modality, and I would say most types of breathwork probably are, but I'm particularly fascinated with the connected breathwork for that reason.
Well, it seems like a theme is emerging from this conversation around this idea of interconnectedness. So your journey has been very interconnected, a lot of different disciplines and a lot of different types of skills and domains. And then, the forest bathing is about reconnecting and being interconnected with nature, and your breath work interconnected. Um, you know, just one of the things that we've been talking about at Creative on Purpose is the importance of integrity, meaning in and of itself of a whole. And so we talk a lot about work-life balance is a delusion, and again an invitation often to shame and suffering. What if you just showed up as an integrated whole wherever you happen to be, whether it was in your personal life as a spouse, as a parent, as a friend, or in your professional life as a freelancer, an entrepreneur, or employer or employee. And it feels like the breath work would actually be a really could be a really powerful lever for someone that wanted to achieve that kind of interconnectedness, where they didn't feel like they had to change hats or switch gears all day long as they moved through different roles in their life. um,
Yeah.
don't know if any of that resonates or not, but it's just a noticing.
It does. Well, what I wanted to say on that was that we actually get seven. I mean, I actually developed some audio guides for the breathwork so that people can go off and do it for themselves. And but we've done some sessions on that for creativity. But what's really interesting with the breathwork, or with our breath itself, is that actually we get about approximately 70 to 75% of our energy from breath. So breath, I would have thought previously, historically, I guess I always thought that we would get our fuel or our energy from food, but actually 70-75% comes from the breath, because what we're bringing in through the breath is oxygen and energy. And that comes into our cells and it refuels our cells. And when our cells are fueled, they're very healthy. So it with that brings clarity, I think. And in terms of creativity, as I said, developed this audio guide specifically for that. But really the basis of any of those audio guides that I've developed around better sleep, or having more energy, or feeling more creative and clear, the foundation is still the same. And it is this connected breathing method, because what you're also doing is that it actually works on three levels. So the physical we've spoken about, is bringing fuel into the body, into the cells, in the form of energy and oxygen. But we actually liken the body to a filing cabinet. So over the periods of our years, however old we are, when we feel stressed, or when we feel threatened, or when we feel unsafe, our body goes into something called the fight or flight mode. And when we go into that mode, and sometimes we know it consciously, and often we don't. And what happens then is we restrict ourselves, we kind of constrict our bodies. And what we also do is we hold our breath. So when we hold our breath, we're not bringing that fuel into the body, but what we're also doing is kind of, in restricting that, we are trapping or what's really is the unprocessed emotion. Because what's coming with that lack of safety and fear is also is an emotion. And when we hold our breath, we're not able to process that emotion because the breath is the vehicle by which we process our emotion. So over the period of our lives, we're doing that quite a lot. We're going into this fight or flight, maybe major, maybe minor, holding our breath, developing poor breath patterns. So we're not breathing fully and accessing our lung capacity. And we're also closing down on those emotions that we feel, particularly in Western society, we don't go out shouting generally in the streets when we feel stressed. We're kind of taught to, just particularly, in Britain, there's, a kind of must behave appropriately. So we shut our emotions down. What we talk about with conscious connected breath is it's like a filing cabinet. Our body is really our subconscious, where all that unprocessed emotion is stored. And it's like a filing cabinet doing the breath work. So we're going in with a feather duster, and we're dusting off those old dusty files, those old unprocessed emotions, and we're very safely and very gently releasing them by bringing breath into the body. So it's really quite fascinating, and all of that obviously leads to greater clarity, and with that comes greater creativity.
Yeah. Well, it sounds very. We talk a lot about doing difference making from the inside out, leadership from the inside out, and so it sounds like you're talking about well being from the inside out is part of it.
Definitely.
So we're coming to the end of our half hour together, Justine, and the last question is always just to ask guests, although you've already shared plenty of actionable wisdom, if there was just one tip, piece of advice, quote, maxim, anything that you would share with someone um, tuning in that either aspires to develop and deliver the difference only they can make, or want to advance in making things better through an endeavor of their own creation, what would, based on your journey and your experience, what would your advice or insight be for them?
I think it's been the theme of today, and I'm making it the theme of the rest of my life. But I really do believe that this point of reconnection is everything for our future as human beings. And I think until we learn to reconnect with ourselves, feel still with ourselves, feel comfortable, love ourselves, then I think we're in for a rocky ride. And um, I think if it would be one bit of advice, it would be to have the tools to help you um, manage the rocky road that's ahead for a lot of us. We see it now, but I think there's more to come with climate change. And really, I think having the tools such as breath work, or having a practice such as going out in the morning and going into nature, are the things that I have found invaluable, and I think we all will need moving forward. So if there was one bit of advice, it would be to um, find the tools that work for you and keep using them regularly, so that you can, what we call in the breathwork, is surf the emotional roller coaster. And I think there's more to come for the human race. So
Mhm.
that's what I would say.
I love it. I love it. You got to put the oxygen mask on yourself before you can save the person next to you. Really,
Definitely.
really appreciate that. And we want to thank you all for tuning in. Justine and I really appreciate you lending us the valuable gift of your time and attention. We hope that today's broadcast motivates you to lean into an endeavor that matters with greater curiosity and courage. You can learn more about Justine and the difference that she's making right down there at wonderbreath.co. And of course, it's always fantastic to see you at creativeonpurpose.com. Now, take the insight and inspiration from this conversation, fly higher in the difference only you can make. Justine, thank you so much for your insight and wisdom, and good luck getting the rest of your Christmas lights up.
Thank you so much, Scott. I really enjoyed our time together. Thank you.
Likewise.